Chapter 6. Suggestion in Business. In the preceding chapter we called your attention to the fact that suggestion is now recognized in the affairs of everyday business life, and that instruction along its lines is now given to those aspiring to reach the attention of the public. Business psychology has come to stay, and it has worked a revolution in many branches of commercial life. Appeals to the public mind are no longer made in a haphazard, hit or miss manner, but along certain well-established methods of attracting and holding the public attention, to the end that desire may be aroused and demand created for the wares of the sellers. Especially is the above so with regard to salesmanship and advertising. It is a fact not generally recognized, that advertising is merely one form of salesmanship selling at long range. And accordingly the selling talk of the salesman and the selling talk of the advertisement must be based upon the same principles. This fact is recognized by all of the live advertisers and salesmen, and improvement along the lines of selling suggestion is being made constantly. In the training of salesmen, there is a constant reference to suggestion in all of its forms. The embryo salesman is instructed in what is called the pre-approach, by which is meant the suggestion and auto-suggestion. General self-training of the salesman, along the lines of auto-suggestion, to the end that he may get himself into the proper frame of mind to impress the customer in the best way. The salesman is instructed to fill himself with the idea of the value of the goods he is to offer the customer, the fact that these goods are just what the latter needs and should have in his business, the fact that instead of asking a favor of the customer, the salesman is really doing him a good turn in calling his attention to them. In short, the missionary spirit with its burning zeal for conversion is inculcated in the salesman, so that he becomes an enthusiastic advocate instead of a mere seller of goods. If the instruction in suggestion went no further than this, it would be a valuable addition to the qualities of the salesman, but it goes far beyond this point. The next stage in the instruction of the salesman is what is called the approach, by which is meant the manner in which the prospective customer should be approached. The salesman is instructed to carry himself in such a way as to suggest self-respect, and to dress in such a way as to suggest business standing and prosperity, avoiding shabbiness on the one hand, and over-display on the other. He is taught to maintain a cheerful, optimistic state of mind, for this suggests itself in his outward appearance and manner and produces a much better effect on the customer than would a surly, crabbed, pessimistic manner. Then follows the proper method of introducing oneself, and one's business, to the customer, according to the character of the latter. One of the largest selling concerns in the country, in its little manual for the use of its salesmen, says, the first 5 minutes of speaking to a man is likely to make or break you as far as that sale is concerned. If you are in any way antagonistic or offensive to him, you have hurt your chances badly from the start. If you have failed to definitely please or attract him, you have not done enough. Then follow instructions regarding the psychological elements of a sale. First comes attention. This is the first suggestion in business point in the sale, and the salesman must secure it, or else he can proceed no further. Then follows the stage of curiosity, or interest, in which the salesman is taught to arouse the former and gain the latter. Interest must be aroused before desire may be awakened. To arouse interest, the business proposition, or article of sale, must be presented in an interesting manner, with well-chosen and properly delivered words. This point secured, the salesman is instructed in the science of arousing desire, for in this lies the motive power which leads to sales. The customer must be made to want the thing before he will purchase it. Then he must be made to realize that he can afford to buy it. The price is held back until the psychological moment, and then is introduced in a casual way, with little or no emphasis on the amount, just a suggestion that such and such a price is attached to the thing, sort of a side affair, after all. Then comes the point of closing the sale, and obtaining the order or signature. This is the aim and goal of the entire process, and many are the points of instruction imparted regarding this closing. The signing of the order is suggested by pointing to the proper line with the suggestion, "Sign here, please, some going so far as to suggest the action by handing the customer a fountain pen, slanted at the suggestive angle. The prospective salesman is trained to recognize the various mental traits predominant in the customer, and methods are supplied whereby these qualities may be applied to properly. His vanity, pride, covetousness, social aspirations, jealousy, desire for success, desire for advancement, desire for self-improvement, all these are recognized and have their appropriate suggestions. The imagination is considered, and the salesman is taught how to paint word pictures for it. Salesmanship is indeed a science and an art, in these days, and they are getting it down finer every day. Clerks in retail stores are instructed to have their customers seated, in order that the standing salesman may have the advantage of the suggestive position. They are also trained to suggestion and auto-suggestion. Use the suggestive question, such as "This is a very beautiful shade, isn't it?" or "This will make up well, will it not?" The customer's answer being directly suggested to him, or her, in the first part of the question, which consists of a positive statement followed by a question asking for corroboration. It is much easier to say yes, than no, to such a question, isn't it? The saleswoman who shows her customer an article a little higher in price than one which is being examined, with the remark, "Now here is something very much better. Of course it costs a little more, but it is well worth the difference, but of course," etc. The implied suggestion of the "of course," to the effect that the customer might not wish to exceed the lower price, often acting to put the woman on her mettle, and she buys the higher priced thing just to show that she is able to do so. To the wealthier customers, the suggestion is always of quality, style, exclusiveness, etc., while to the poorer it is always price, bargains, and the rest of it. The salesman or saleswoman who understands human nature and suggestion, will make much larger sales than those who are lacking in this information. The business of window dressing, display, marking prices, etc., makes a liberal use of suggestion. Models are tastefully dressed in the windows, and the women gazing therein receive the suggestion that they too would look that way, if they wore the same goods. The beautifully formed living model is used to try on coats, in the cloak department, that the woman customer may see just how it will look on you. In the millinery department, the young woman upon whom any hat looks stylish is used to try on the various hats, that the customer may see how they will look. All this is suggestion pure and simple, the suggestion of association. Bargain sales, and marked down articles are attractive suggestions. 97 cents, marked down from $1.00, suggests a great saving. $4.98 seems so much cheaper than $5. Odds and ends of trimmings, unwound and mussed up in a heap on a bargain table, suggest great suggestion in business. Bargains. The psychology of the department store is a study in suggestion. In advertising, the same employment of suggestion is made. There is the direct command, or suggestion of authority, which tells you to do certain things at once, or to buy certain things for certain reasons. There is the suggestion of taste and flavor in advertisements of eatables and drinkables. Delicious, fragrant, luscious, sweet, mild, invigorating, these and similar words suggest taste, or smell to the reader. Read the advertising columns of the daily newspaper, or the advertising section of the current magazines, in the light of what we have said, and see the ingenious uses of suggestion. Read the signs in the store windows, or over their doors, and see the part played by suggestion. The store of quality, the home of bargains, etc., these are suggestions. A writer in the magazine Salesmanship says, to make advertising which will sell goods requires development of the human part of the writer. He must realize the different forces which command attention, interest, desire, and conviction. You see then, advertising is salesmanship at long range. The same principles are involved. The same writer says, the fact is that salesmanship and advertising are practically synonymous terms. A good ad man must be a good salesman. The only difference lies in the fact that the salesman meets the customer personally, and the ad man sends him a message in type. The same argument, the same tact, and the same persistence must be present. It takes more brains to sell the goods than it does to make them. You can steal them, but to sell them is an art. A writer in a magazine devoted to advertising says, really clever ad writing goes far and away back of, and deeper than, the smartness of phraseology that men like to pay for. Advertising takes into account the subconscious impressions, the varying phases of suggestion and association as received through the eye, the psychology of the direct command, all worth earnest consideration, and seriously to be reckoned with, however we suggestion and autosuggestion may balk at the terms. This writer was not afraid to call a spade, and he states a psychological truth. Another writer in the same magazine says, advertising is just salesmanship on paper, a mere money-making means of selling goods rapidly. That mysterious something is just printed persuasion, and its other name is selling conviction. Conviction may be imparted at will by those few writers who have closely studied the thought process by which conviction is induced. The mission of every ad is to convert readers into buyers. The main difference between business arguments and business suggestion is that the former uses the broadsword of proof, and the latter the rapier of insinuation. The former appeals to the reason, the latter to the feeling and emotions, and other subconscious mental faculties. Chapter 7. Suggestion and Character. B. Why one's character, we mean one's mental qualities or attributes. Reputation is the opinion that others entertain regarding one. Character is the sum of one's mental qualities and attributes, as they really exist. Character is held to be the result of heredity plus experience and environment. In environment and experience must be included suggestion. Education is largely a matter of suggestion. In fact, some leading authorities claim that a man's education is composed almost entirely of suggestion of some kind. Without entering into a discussion of this question, it may be asserted with safety that a man is largely what he is by reason of the suggestions which he has accepted. Remember, we say accepted, rather than experienced, for one experiences many suggestions which he rejects and refuses to accept. The rejected suggestions affect his character only in an indirect way, that is, in the way of forming a habit of the rejection of similar suggestions. The suggestions which are accepted become a part of his nature and character, and may be removed only by suggestions of an entirely opposite nature, strong enough to neutralize the first ones. This being understood, it will be seen what an important part suggestion plays in the part of all of us. Suggestion and autosuggestion. The suggestions which so forcibly impress themselves upon our characters may reach us along any of the various lines of suggestion, as stated in the preceding chapters. The suggestion of authority is one of the first forms of suggestion that makes its impress upon the youthful mind. The statements, views, opinions, and actions of those to whom the child looks for authority are impressed strongly and deeply upon the child mind. Acting along with this form is suggestion of imitation. The child is an imitative creature, and instinctively picks up the ideas, opinions, and mannerisms, as well as the general code of life of his elders. The child naturally acquires the impressions suggested to him, involuntarily or voluntarily, by those with whom he associates. He grows to resemble those with whom he is surrounded. He is like a sponge absorbing ideas from his associates, particularly his elders, for his nature is to take in and absorb from the outside world. The mind in childhood is particularly plastic, and the habits of his after years are largely influenced by the impressions of his early youth. Certain wise churchmen are reported to have said, "Give us the first 7 years of a child's life, and you may have the rest." And if those first years have been given to those whose suggestive influence is undesirable, that child will have hard work to eradicate the early impressions, in after years. Halleck well says, "The analogy between the plasticity of nerve and brain and that of plaster of Paris has often been pointed out. The freshly mixed plaster can easily be molded at will, as can a youthful brain and nerves. Persons after the age of 30 seldom radically change their habits. Indeed, the age of 20 finds most of our habits already outlined as they are to remain for life. The boor at that age will continue to have boorish peculiarities. Errors in grammar will slip automatically from the tongue. The doctor, the lawyer, the clergyman, the businessman, the teacher, soon acquire the peculiar habits of their professions. If we do not get into the right vocation early in life, we are caught in the vice of habits ill-adapted for a change. Suggestion and character. Our very ways of looking at things have become crystallized. If we put off learning new subjects, we shall remain ignorant of them. While we differ from Professor Halleck, inasmuch as we claim that the new psychology has pointed out methods whereby habits may be changed in after life, yet we agree fully with him in his statement regarding the strength of the impressions and suggestions accepted during youth. But, the effect of suggestion upon character does not cease with the passing of youth. We are affected by it during our entire life. We are constantly being built up from the suggestions we accept. If we yield to the inspiring, hopeful, courageous suggestions contained in the words or examples of others, we tend to develop similar qualities in ourselves. If, on the contrary, we allow the pessimistic, discouraging, hopeless suggestions of failure, from the words and examples of others, to sink into our minds, we tend to grow in accordance therewith. Our thoughts, ideas, actions, and habits become formed from the example and precepts of others, modified of course by our own thoughts on the subject. But even our thoughts and opinions are largely the result of the thoughts and opinions of others which we have accepted. Our lives are being modeled from the patterns which we accept from the outside world, therefore we should be very careful what patterns we accept. It has been often well said that we are the result of what we have thought. And it is likewise true that we have thought largely what we have accepted and selected from the suggestive influences around and about us. It takes a very strong individual to rise above the effect of his environments, and to shake off the prevailing opinions of his associates and strike out in a new line for himself. Such men are akin to geniuses. The ordinary mortal finds himself incapable of effecting the task, unless he has been inspired to renewed and scientific effort by the helpful suggestions and influence of others who know whereof they speak. Take a child of the very best heredity, and place it among the thieves of Whitechapel, where it has constantly suggestion and auto-suggestion. Set for it the authority and example of vice, and it will require almost a miracle to save it from falling into the pit of crime. The inhabitants of a neighborhood grow to resemble each other in many ways, owing to the force of mutual suggestion and example. Removal from one neighborhood to another, from one town to another, has changed the life of many persons, for better or for worse. These facts should not need further proof or argument. The use of one's powers of observation should be sufficient to render them self-evident. The consideration of the above stated facts may tend to produce a feeling of sadness or discouragement in the minds of some who may read them alone, without reference to the remedy. And, indeed, it surely would be a sad and hopeless state of affairs were there no remedy. But nature always supplies an antidote for every bane, and those who seek the remedy will always find it. Nature has given man a will to use and order his life and character as he will. And by that will he is able to reject and refuse the suggestions which are not conducive to his welfare, and to seek, welcome and accept those which are calculated to strengthen and build up his character along the desired lines. If man were but the creature of chance and circumstance, then indeed would he be but as an automaton moved by the wires of fate, circumstance, and environment. But with the possession of the sovereign will, he may cast aside and away from him the injurious things, and draw to himself those calculated to help and develop him. No one is compelled to accept a suggestion, no one is prevented from rejecting one. On the contrary, every person has the power to choose and decide between the impressions coming to him from the outside world, and to accept or reject as he wills. By the proper mental attitude one may cause adverse suggestions to fly from him as the bullet is deflected from the steel armor of the battleship. And by turning the attention toward the kind of suggestions he wishes for, he may discover them and select them as his own from amidst the mass. Suggestion and character. Of impressions of the contrary character. One draws his own to him, he finds that for which he seeks. As Kay says, when one is engaged in seeking for a thing, if he keep the image of it clearly before the mind, he will be very likely to find it, and that too, probably where it would otherwise have escaped his notice. Truly we may say of the mind, as has been said of the eye, that it perceives only what it brings with it the power of perceiving. And as John Burroughs has aptly illustrated, no one ever found the walking fern who did not have the walking fern in his mind. A person whose eye is full of Indian relics, picks them up in every field he walks through. They are quickly recognized because the eye has been commissioned to find them. And the mind may be commissioned to find the things needed and sought for, as well as may be the eye. Halleck well says, regarding the power of the will to shape one's thoughts, desires, and actions, instead of allowing them to be controlled from the outside, along the lines of suggestion, in the capacity for attention, we have the key to the freedom of the will. Voluntary attention makes the motive. The motive does not make the attention. Hence the motive is a product of the will. If I withdraw my attention from a motive idea, it loses vigor, like a plant deprived of air and moisture. By sheer force of willpower, many a one has withdrawn his attention from certain temptations, centered it elsewhere, and thus developed a counter motive. And here is where the individual may make use of the power of outward suggestion in his own development of character. By refusing to allow his attention to be attracted or held by impressions and suggestions, or their sources, which are detrimental to his welfare, he renders them ineffective and of no avail. Likewise, by holding his attention ever open for, and then firmly fixed upon those which are conducive to his welfare, he may surround himself with a continuous atmosphere of helpful and uplifting suggestive impressions, which will inspire and strengthen him. Man is the master of suggestion, if he will but use the will with which nature has endowed him. Suggestion and autosuggestion. Under the subject of autosuggestion, which will be considered in the latter part of this book, the reader will find taught a system of self-development, or character building, which will be found not only to develop one along desired lines, but which will also tend to attract to himself suggestive influences in harmony with his own character, for like attracts like in the world of thought and suggestion, as in every other field of nature's operations. Chapter 8. Suggestion in Childhood. In the preceding chapter we called your attention to the fact that the period of childhood is one in which mental impressions or suggestions are readily accepted, and firmly retained in the character. This fact is lost sight of by the majority of parents and teachers, who seem to think, if they think of it at all, that the child's mind works precisely like that of the adult. They imagine that a child should be able to see and understand the reason of things, and to be amenable to appeals to reason, whereas the child has not fully reached the reasoning stage, as the term is generally used. The child is governed almost altogether by the feelings and emotions, and from the effect of impressions and suggestions received from those around it. This being the case, we may see how careful we should be to avoid the use of improper suggestions to the child, and to use the proper ones. The child naturally accepts the suggestions of its parents, in a way that would surprise the parent could he or she but get a glimpse of the workings of the little mind. Too often is the child impressed with the idea that Johnny is such a stubborn child he cannot be moved when he makes up his mind to a thing. Or, Edward Everett is so delicate, the least thing upsets him. We have to be so careful about him. Suggestion and autosuggestion. Or Mary has the meanest disposition, she seems to do things just to spite one, and annoy those around her. Or Samantha is too stupid for anything, she acts as if she wasn't just right in her senses, sometimes. And so on, all in the presence of the child. And the amazing thing is that the parent, or teacher, does not seem to realize that the child listens attentively to what is said, and grows to accept the suggestion of authority and repetition, and naturally acts along the lines of the suggestion. Thought takes form in action, and these mental images manifest themselves in material form. The child feels that he is just what his elders are claiming for him, and naturally falls into line. Long before the parents realize it, the child is forming habits of character from these repeated suggestions made about it in its presence. The process is simple. The child does not reason over the matter and then decide to act upon the suggested characteristics. Its subconscious mentality, or habit mind, simply absorbs these suggested impressions, and when they are repeated New York times a day, the impression becomes fixed in that region of the mind. Just imagine yourself, you who are reading these words, being subjected to a running fire of verbal criticism of this kind. Would you not tend to make good the bad qualities attributed to you? Would you not, eventually, grow to play the part assigned to you? That is, if you didn't rebel and change your environment. The child cannot change its environment, but must stay where it is and listen to this perpetual flow of adverse suggestion, week in and week out. And, when you realize that the child's mind is 100 times more impressionable than is your own, you may begin to understand the effect of these suggestions upon it. In the same way, the repeated remarks of some foolish mothers, that Eloise is such a beautiful child, people notice her on the streets, and turn around to watch her, this in the presence of the child must exert an influence over the mind and future character of that child. And the common suggestion that Carmencita is so bashful, she is always afraid of strangers. Suggestion in childhood. And I cannot get her to make up to them now. Just imagine what that must mean to the sensitive child when she hears it said in her very presence and that of the stranger. How would you feel, if you were sensitive, and your friends should say in your presence when you met a stranger for the first time, "Oh, Mr. Brown, you must really excuse Miss Psyche's bashfulness. She is so shy and retiring. She blushes every time she meets a stranger, and cannot think of a word to say." How would you relish having salt thus rubbed in the open wound of your self-consciousness? Multiply your feelings by 10, and you have the child in question. Cannot you see that you are using the very strongest possible method of developing the self-consciousness of the child, the very means that you would use were you actually trying to make the child shy and bashful? Besides the shock to the sensitive nature, you are also actually building character in the child along the lines of the suggestion of repetition. We have seen mothers cry out to children who had picked up an ornament, "Oh, Mabel, you'll drop it, look out, it will slip from your fingers, take it away from her, quick, before she drops it," and more of the same kind. When one realizes that it is by precisely this class of suggestions that suggestible subjects are made to perform actions in experimental psychology, one may wonder why Mabel does not drop the thing at the first suggestion, not to speak of its insistent repetition, and often she does. A kindly, "Put it back in its place, Mabel, mother doesn't like her vases moved about," would be better calculated to preserve the integrity of the vase. Similar to this is the suggestion of, "Oh dear, she'll fall down the stairs, look out dear, you'll fall in a minute, look out now." Can you wonder if the child does fall, after a suggestion like that? Can't you see that you are supplying motive power for the suggested action? In such case, the thing to do is to keep cool, and above everything else not to let the child catch your fear thought. Fear is contagious, by the channel of suggestion. If you have ever suggestion and auto-suggestion witnessed any experimental work in psychology, in its branch of suggestion, you may begin to appreciate the motive force latent in a strong suggestion to an impressionable mind, and children have impressionable minds. We feel annoyed that we should have to include any reference to the criminal practice of giving children the suggestion of fright. The subject belongs to the dark ages of child-rearing, but alas, we hear of new instances of its persistence, every few days. When one thinks of the terrors of the little mind due to the suggestions poured into it regarding boogeymen, shadow men, big bear will catch you, something will grab your foot if you step out of bed, better look out when you go up the dark stairs, and all the rest of the infernal suggestions of that kind, one feels it difficult to speak with the conventional restraint. We have known women of middle age who have never been able to outlive these fear impressions given in early youth. The big bear is so firmly lodged in their subconscious mind that all their knowledge and reason is not sufficient to eradicate it. As the well-known Englishman, of undoubted bravery and highest reasoning faculties, once said, I laugh at and believe nothing of the grisly things in the daytime, but in the midnight darkness of my bedchamber I find myself believing in all the horrors of my childish imaginings. And all this the result of these criminal suggestions. Many a child has been rendered nervous and fearful for the rest of its life, by these boogie-boos of childhood. To one who understands the workings of the law of suggestion, such things seem as bad as witchcraft and sorcery. The reverse of this general proposition is true. Just as adverse suggestions may be harmful to the child, so may the proper ones be helpful. If you must make suggestions to, and about the little one, use as their subjects the favorable points of the child, or those in which you wish the child to improve. In the case of the bashful child, give it the silent suggestion of association by ignoring its shyness, take no notice of its failing, and see that. Suggestion in childhood. Your friends act likewise. Soon the child, seeing that it is not noticed at all, will begin to evince the natural childish desire to attract attention, and will begin to come out of its shell. The child with the dirty hands may be put on its mettle, by calling the attention of friends to how Johnny is getting to be a big boy now, and how much cleaner he is keeping his hands than when he was a little fellow. Always map your suggestions on what you want the children to be, not what you fear they will be, or are. Just as in auto-suggestion, you hold the mental image of what you wish to become, as a pattern upon which your subconsciousness will model your new character, so should you ever hold before the child a mental picture of that which you wish it to be. Do not misunderstand us, we do not mean to advise preaching to the child. No child likes that we mean to act, and suggest, that the child actually is becoming or acting as you wish. You will get the idea better if you will reverse the line of suggestions objected to by us in the first part of this chapter. Encourage the positives and the negatives will die away. Cultivate the desirable tendencies, and the undesirable ones will die for want of nourishment. Above all, realize that the mind of the tiny child is like a soft impression plate, or a sensitive photographic film, therefore be careful what objects of suggestion you place before it. Place bright, strong, positive pictures in its mind, and avoid those of the opposite kind. In conclusion, we would remind you that the actions, views, ideas, and general life of the parents act as suggestions for the child. Like Papa and Mama, is the instinctive idea in the mind of every child, from its earliest days. Therefore Papa and Mama have considerable responsibility in this direction, during the early days of the child particularly. What Papa or Mama do, is gospel to the child. Everything, good and bad, is worthy of imitation. Suggestion of imitation is always active in the family. Govern yourselves accordingly. Teachers have the same. Suggestion and auto-suggestion responsibility. Teacher does it, is a sufficient excuse for the child. There is always a case of Akil among us, talking notes. And these notes are suggestive notes. We feel that a whole book might well be written on this subject, in order to do it even faint justice. But we trust that the hints that we have given here may reach some for whom they are intended, and who need them very much. You may not be able to give your children the riches or advantages that you would like to bestow upon them, perhaps that is so much the better for them, but you have the opportunity of giving them the best possible suggestions, the best in the shop, and that is much, very much indeed.